Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Welcome back to the podcast. This week, our guest is Barry Gogel, and he's an attorney with Rifkin Weiner Livingston, LLC. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you for having me.
So, Barry, tell me, how did you decide to get into law, and what excites you about it?
How did I decide to get into law? Well, actually, I was a school teacher. It's funny, I was just telling this story to my sister. Why did I become a lawyer from being a school teacher and a math major? So although more and more mathematicians see an overlap in law, I'm a bit of a unicorn because most lawyers are people that were poli-sci English majors. They're readers and writers in college. I was a mathematician in college. But I got into law for really because I loved teaching, and now I still teach. I teach at the law school. But I got frustrated with teaching in the public schools and decided I wanted to get myself into a position where I could affect public schools on a broader scale and affect schooling in society on a broader scale. Now, I did some work in that and wrote some papers on that, but best laid plans go awry. And so I ended up in a litigation. Now we call this a litigation boutique, where I do general business litigation and now spend a lot of time doing government procurement litigation, pretty focused on the state of Maryland. But, there are specific procedures for the state of Maryland. But for your listeners who may have a startup and want to look at government contracting wherever they can be, I think there are certain things that anybody going into that world should look at and be careful of. And the pitfalls are the same, maybe bigger some places than others.
Now, when you're saying that you're doing a lot of the procurement within Maryland, is that you're representing the business owner against Maryland or vice versa?
Yeah, typically what happens is a state like the state of Maryland or a government like the state of Maryland will put out, when they need work, services, when they need a road built, and more now, it's when they need a website built.
Right.
They will put out either a request for proposals or an invitation for bids. Those are two very similar but different types of procurements. And businesses, they call them solicitations, are put on government websites. In Maryland, we call it EMA, the EMA Maryland Workplace. And businesses keep track of these and look for opportunities as well. And when they see something that's in their wheelhouse, they will often take a crack at it. A lot of times, the government contract is a great place for startup businesses and small businesses because there are certain set-asides to promote small business, startup business work.
So when you're doing the litigation, what are you litigating?
Okay, so what happens is there are two types of litigations that we are involved in. One is called bid protests, or just protests, and the other is called contract claims. A bid protest is a business that participated in a solicitation and for one reason or another did not get the contract and thinks it was wrong, thinks there was something arbitrary, capricious, or unlawful in the evaluation process. And very often there is. But when somebody comes to me, I look very closely at the process. In Maryland, we have pretty robust procurement laws, and I think that's a good thing, and I can explain that. But I will look for an objective wrong, such as they asked for certain criteria. Maybe they asked for a project manager who had an MBA. And we had a project manager who had an MBA, but they then decided they wanted an MBA with 5 years of experience. Well, you didn't say 5 years of experience. So my client got downgraded for not having 5 years of experience. Well, that's an objective wrong. That is applying a criteria that is not in the solicitation. That's something where we would protest. We would file an appeal to the procurement officer. Procurement officer might actually, and we've been very successful when it's an objective wrong like that, realize they made a mistake and said, oops, it was an honest mistake. We'll have to redo it, or we'll have to put your guy into the competition, or what have you, make a corrective action. Many times it's not quite so clear, especially to the procurement officer, who is the one who made the original decision in the first place. They will usually, if that's the case, deny the protest. And then here in Maryland, we take it to the Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals. And it should be an expeditious process, which is unfortunate, and which is why a lot of people get frustrated about the protest world. But then we'll litigate it before the Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals. And even if we think they've gotten it wrong, there's a procedure for judicial review to the courts. So it is a multi-step process.
Now, if you're protesting this, does that stop them from awarding whatever the project is, or do they just keep going and you hope that it's speedy so you can stop it in time?
So yeah, I have to be careful here because we have a case right now where something like that's going on. Generally, it is supposed to stop the process.
Okay.
The state is allowed to go forward and seek award of the contract before something called the Board of Public Works for Maryland. But they're only supposed to do that if there's a substantial state need.
Okay.
And where does that get litigated? It doesn't happen that often, although, some administrations are more aggressive with it than others. As I said, people get concerned about procurements and protests, thinking that they're a slowdown of the system. It's why government is so slow and can't work and blah, blah, blah. But they forget that the reason we have these laws, and here in Maryland, we have a long history giving rise to these laws and regulations, because we had a county executive who went up to become a governor of Maryland, who went up to become a vice president of the country. And at every single stage, he was taking money under the table. I'm talking about Spiro Agnew.
Oh, yeah.
And that really got Maryland to focus on and improve its procurement laws. But the procurement laws aren't just to protect against corruption. They have an actually broader, greater, more important, but more difficult to quantify purpose, and that is to promote competition.
Right.
And that's what your listeners will really want to look for, because if there's not robust procurement laws that are open, fair competition, and if there's not a strong way to protest, then businesses are going to be reluctant to compete.
Right.
And if they're reluctant to compete, competition is lowered. How do we know we're getting the best price, the best product for the best price? Everybody agrees that in a free market economy, competition is good, and things that promote competition are good. And open, fair, accountable procurements and accountable procurement officers promote competition. When we try to suppress the protests, we are actually chilling competition, and that's not good for anybody. The problem is, it's hard to measure because you don't know who didn't bid and how much the state would have saved. So we have to remind sometimes our public officials why we have these important laws and why it's beneficial. It may slow things down, but there are ways the government procurement system, if it's an emergency, if there is a substantial state interest, there are ways to expedite the system.
So in talking about this, if a client or someone wants to get into this arena and start bidding on this state work, how did they know they're being wronged?
Well, first, they didn't get the job.
Well, of course.
Listen, it's easy to know you're being wronged if you didn't get the job and you were the lowest bidder.
Well,
Yeah. But, you know, a good procurement system will allow an opportunity for a debriefing. It's in everybody's interest for procurement officers to tell disappointed bidders why they didn't get the award. And very often that'll shed light, this is what your weakness was. Well, this wasn't my weakness. Well, this is what your weakness was, but the person who's awarded had the same weakness. So there's information can be obtained that way. A really important thing that anybody getting into the system should look for at the outset is making sure that the solicitation is clear and unambiguous. If there's ambiguity about what's the right computer program to use, that you should get that ahead of time. Find that, don't guess. There's opportunities in any good procurement procedures to ask questions, to make sure, and to protest ahead of time if there's an ambiguity. In Maryland, and I'm sure the federal government and elsewhere, if there's an ambiguity and you don't protest ahead of time, you can't protest later on. So that's an important thing to look for.
So are these procurement officers, are they required to do the debrief?
Yeah,
Or
in a good procurement system, yeah. And
well,
not only they in Maryland, not only are they required to do the debrief when with the notice of award, they're required to tell you your entitlement to a debrief.
okay.
And so protests they happen very quickly because again it should be an expeditious procedure. So usually you have in Maryland you have 7 days when you knew or should have known of your basis for protest. So first 7 days starts to run when you didn't get the award. If there's any information in the award letter that seems to tell you that something is amiss, then you need to protest. The second one is in the debriefing. An example we had was in the debriefing. A client had been told that their project, or the solicitation, it called for project manager, field supervisor, and another key personnel to have 5 years of industry experience. We listed people, they had 20 and 30 years of industry experience. Right. They said our key personnel didn't have the right industry experience, didn't meet that specification. We said, well, wait a second. You said 5 years. We had 5 years. We had 20 years. We had 30. No, when we said 5 years of industry experience, we meant 5 years of industry experience of your project manager as a project manager. Well, you didn't say job specific industry experience. You just said industry experience. That was not in the specifications. We could have said it was ambiguous, but we didn't even think it was ambiguous. We said you are applying a criteria that was not in the specifications. You're using an evaluation criteria that was not in the specification. Therefore, it's arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful.
Right.
And we ended up doing well with that one.
So what are some of the common mistakes that the businesses are making when, besides not listening to the debrief and stuff like that, in going through this process? Because it sounds like it can be pretty tedious.
Well, listen, we don't do the proposals themselves. We don't give advice on proposals themselves. We give advice after they have it. They believe they have a basis for protest. One of the what I think distinguishes us, and it goes to one of the problems. If you think that the evaluator just got it wrong, they like the other guy better just because they gave him more experience because they had 10 years of experience or we only had 8 years of experience or something like that. You think they just got it wrong, or you had 8 years of experience on small jobs and they had 8 years of experience on big jobs, and that's probably a black line wrong too. But if you think the evaluator just got it wrong, it's a subjective process.
Right.
So I tell my clients, it's an uphill battle. That's a really tough one to win. But if there is the objective wrong, That's something you're more likely to win. What they mistake they made is that there is a question or ambiguity. If they don't guess, if there is a question, ask the question and get the answer. A lot of times you ask the question and get the answer, and it's not helpful. And these proposals, they cost a lot to do. There's a lot of resources being
Hmm.
put in there. So they have to choose their project wisely. Don't go after something that you think is, you're putting a square peg in a round hole. It's a
Okay.
lot of resources. Stay in your wheelhouse. Look for the projects that are in your wheelhouse.
Hmm.
Stay in your lane. If you think you can use it to learn more and broaden your lanes, that's great. But if you're looking for government contracts, that's a real important. Don't be afraid, especially if you're in a jurisdiction with good, robust procurement procedures. Don't be afraid to go for it. A lot of people that are concerned that the government, there's a procurement officer, he's been working with this company for this many years, and there's a friendship. And that's what the procurement laws are designed to level out. It's designed to be a fair, open, honest competition system. But on the flip side, if you think there is a wiring, people like to work with people they're familiar with. Change
Right.
is difficult. And so if you think there is a wiring, quote unquote wiring, don't be afraid to protest that. We had another case, an IT case where I'm not going to use names because it ended up in a settlement, but where our clients took a look at the RFP and realized it was geared toward a certain company. And they were the incumbent. So this
Right.
is not a business. And they didn't even make an offer. But what they did do is they protested ahead of time. They put in that protest before the solicitation, saying it looked like the specifications were unduly restrictive. It looked like there was bias toward this one company.
Right.
And it turned out that when we got into the case and got the documents, we found a lot of communications with the agency and somebody who was in charge of the procurement, not the procurement officer themselves. That was a good day in court when a hearing officer clears the room and says, "Why are we still here?"
Yeah.
After you've cross-examined their witness.
That's funny. So you said that you're still teaching. What do you teach?
Yes, I teach at the University of Maryland Law School. I teach negotiations in the fall, and we have teams that we send around the country. I coach what we call the ADR team. In the spring, because we have a sports law practice as well, I teach sports in the law. That's the greatest part about the sports law practice, as I tell my students, is sports law is fun, so you get to it's fun, but you also get to learn all the business principles in a very unique environment: corporate governance, collective bargaining, antitrust, huge antitrust, intellectual property, that type of stuff. It's fun.
Yeah. So again, you talk about you have your practice, you have particular things you do, you have your niche or whatever. Lots of times when people are going to hire professionals, oh, hey, who do type thing. Talk about the importance of finding somebody that truly has that background
Sure.
and what you need.
Yeah, sure. I mean, uh, for a small business, getting an attorney on the front end and it doesn't have to be one of these big 100 office places.
Right.
Somebody who knows the local market, knows the issues, so that when you're papering not just creating the corporation, but creating the documents, the licenses. I'm working right now with a couple of businesses that want to. It's actually not, one's in the IP world and one is in the IT world, where you know they ran into problems because they drafted their license agreements themselves.
Yeah.
And when things went that's fine if things are hunky-dory with everybody involved. Unfortunately, it's our job as attorneys to be mindful of and to really almost assume things are going to go bad, because we have to make sure our clients are protected if, and we have to think when things go bad. And that's the importance of a good business lawyer. If it's intellectual property you're dealing with, we have a firm that specializes just in computer licensing that we go to and talk to and say, hey, take a look at this, make sure we're not missing any issues, because you look at these issues all the time.
Right.
You know, what do they say? An ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. An ounce of business attorney is worth 5,000 pounds of litigation attorney.
I think, and that's one of the things that, yes, there's certain things you can do yourself, but I think that that's one where it's just like, you end up, yes, you're going to save $100 or $200, even $500 by not having an attorney help you at the beginning, but the amount that it can cost you on the backside of not having the right agreements, the right contracts, and everything else set up. Not everything on the internet is good.
Right.
So it's definitely worth doing your homework and getting the right people to help you.
And it's also worth it. Like, you go to the doctor's office, which you go every year. You don't have to go to your attorney's office every year,
Right.
but regularly have them check up your documents. Things change.
And I think, because I know that I talk to my attorney on a regular basis,
Right.
but there's stuff that has crept up that it's like, where in the hell did that come from? And,
Right.
Let him do his job and find out, okay, it's nothing, but somebody made a mistake, but it's sitting there, especially if you want to sell or bring in partners or do anything like that, you need to know what's going on.
Right.
What have I not asked you that you wish I had? We've covered a bunch of stuff quickly. All right. So you're here in Maryland. Are you an O's fan or a Nats fan?
Okay, so we represented the Orioles in the Mazin dispute. I said we were sports lawyers.
Right.
My love affair of the Orioles goes back generations.
Yeah.
I think the proper question might be, am I an O's fan or am I an Expos fan? Yeah, so no, growing up in Baltimore, we were taught to disdain all things Washington.
Right. Well, I mean, the great thing is that the Orioles have a pretty darn good team. I mean, we just went through a little rough patch, the past week or so, but they're pulling themselves out.
And listen, I have only good things to say about the outgoing ownership, but I also love the new ownership. I think he's a good
I think the new ownership is really showing a lot in getting involved in the community, and it's definitely just kind of like the O's themselves, kind of a new breath of life being lifted in them, for sure.
Being an owner is a really tough position to be in. The policies and the politics pushing you all around in different directions. This gentleman seems to be handling it pretty well. I'm reading Bill Beck's biography right now, and it seems to me that he was a paradigm owner, and it seems to me that Mr. Rubenstein is following that very, very successful playbook.
Right. Well,
no pun intended.
It was great talking with you today. If any of our listeners would like to reach out to you, to talk to you about some of the procurement laws and getting help with this, how can they reach out to you?
All right. So Rifkin Weiner Livingston is our law firm. Our phone number is 410-769-8080. And my email address is my first name initial D, last name Gogel. So it's BGOGEL at rwllaw.com. It's not the easiest name or domain name. So call us 769-8080. That might be easier.
Great. Barry, appreciate your time. Appreciate the talk today. Let's go O's.
Go O's. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Hey, this week our guest was Barry Gogel, and he's an attorney with Rifkin Weiner Livingston, LLC. I'll see you guys next week.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.